No, we meet every Wednesday. Discuss one of our
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out. On behalf of Litcrawl, I would like to welcome you to Phase 2 of the Litcrawl. Tonight's free event is part of Litcrawl, which is a festival that has been going on for 17 years now. This festival would not exist without the generosity of our sponsors and awesome people like all of you. As many of you know, we're a nonprofit organization and we depend on donations. I will be passing around an envelope. If you happen to have an extra $1 or $2, feel free to slip it inside, and then I will step down and head to the back, and it will make its way to me. Thanks again for coming, and enjoy the reading. Hi there, my name is Allison, and I'll be hosting the second hour of the Litcrawl tonight for you, and featuring the Alabama Street Writers Group. And the Alabama Street Writers Group is a by writers, for writers group that's been meeting since 2012, and they provide critique for everything from flash fiction, humorous essays, to novellas and novels. Our theme tonight is lost and found. Sometimes we're lost, sometimes we're found, sometimes we lose and find possessions. Tonight, 8 writers will read original pieces that explore lost and found in their everyday lives. And we invite you to stay after the readings for a reception with wine and light snacks, and you can talk to all the writers. And books and other materials from tonight's writers are also on sale towards the front. So let's get to our writers. First we have Ateret. She writes poetry and fiction, and she's the winner of the 2014 annual Palo Alto Weekly Short Story Contest. Her writing is influenced by her experience working in the healthcare industry and her observations of the fragmented and indirect path to health that many people follow. She'll read an abridged version of her short story called Jimmy and Claire.
Thank you. Jimmy. Jimmy rolled over. The clock said 3:43 a.m. Jimmy. Now her tiny hands tugged at his shirt and her nails scratched his skin. He didn't answer. He knew it wouldn't matter. Jimmy, the spices are out of order and the mirror wasn't wiped right, so there are streaks. Go back to bed, Claire. Silence. He'd been alone with his stepdaughter for just over 3 years. Claire had been 2 years old when he'd become her dad, 4 when her mom had died, and 7 when the behavior had started. Jimmy could hear Claire walk away. When the sound of her steps ended, he knew she was standing in front of the spice rack, reciting the alphabet quietly and placing caraway before cinnamon. Jimmy had met Claire's mom through his work as a firefighter. Stacy was a nurse in the emergency room at General. Jimmy was waiting in line at the hospital cafeteria when a red-headed blur moved across his line of vision. Stacy had a speedy walk that forced her hips to rapidly salsa from side to side and caused her ID badges to click like maracas. Jimmy had never been so attracted to scrubs in his life. At first they tiptoed around their new love, holding it like a glass egg, not wanting to smudge the surface with the residue of old mistakes and battle scars. But then she'd introduced him to Claire and he'd found himself in love again, this time with the 2.5-foot-tall blonde monster. 2 months later, he and Stacy were married. They gave Claire a ring too. Hers was pink. Jimmy! He woke up again. This time, Claire was lying next to him. She fit into the dent between his shoulder blades. Jimmy, I'm sorry I woke you up. Also, I'm sorry I sorted your sock drawer. Jimmy wasn't sorry. Of all the regrets he had, marrying Stacy was not one of them. The hardest part of being a widower, though, was not the loneliness, not the absence of physical love, not the gaping hole where companionship had once been. It was that he missed hearing his name come from the mouth of a woman who loved him. There was something special about the intonation that he craved. Claire had it, not in the same way as Stacy, but it was there and it fit into his life like the missing piece. Jimmy moved his arm behind him and wrapped his hand around Claire's calf. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he said. "We'll put everything back as it should be." Claire remembered the scary day. It was 3 years after her mom had died. When they'd heard the shots being fired near the big kids' classroom, Miss Best, the teacher, shoved all their desks into the corner and told them to get underneath. Claire crouched under hers and counted the screws in the wood. There were 4 on each of the longer sides and 2 on each of the shorter sides. That made her desk a rectangle. Someone far away screamed. Claire put 8 of her fingers on the screws on the long ends of her desk and circled the washers. It bothered her that one screw didn't have a washer. Now she'd have to put that finger somewhere else to balance it out. She looked over at Timmy, whose snot was dripping onto his t-shirt. Gross. A man wearing a glass mask came into the room and stepped on the blue and green stripes of the rainbow rug. Claire usually sat on the yellow. When Miss Best signaled for the class to follow her and the man, Claire hoped they wouldn't get married. She had wanted Miss Best to marry Jimmy because Miss Best was pretty like Prairie Dawn from Sesame Street. Claire thought they would ask her to be the flower girl. She would wear a yellow dress. She would keep her pink ring. Jimmy was at the station house when the call came in. He sped towards the school trying to convince himself it had been a field trip day. The campus was roped off, but a police officer let him in. When Claire saw him, she broke away from the class and ran past her teacher, a plain young girl who was wiping a boy's t-shirt with a tissue. Claire had hugged Jimmy tightly, leaned into his shoulder, and sobbed something about someone getting married. Claire lay in Jimmy's bed and waited until the clock hit all even numbers. It had once been her mom and Jimmy's bed, but after her mom died from cancer, Jimmy had hauled their mattress out to the sidewalk and left it there with a sign marked, "Free." The mattress had been gone the next morning, and Claire had seen Jimmy looking at the window at where it had been. The wrinkle between his brows had been there. Claire had thought she could put a penny in it and it would stick. She got up when the time was 6:48 a.m. Jimmy was in the kitchen, sitting in his chair and sipping coffee. Claire climbed into his lap, rested her head on his upper body, and held fistfuls of his chest hair between her fingers. "Jimmy, do you think Mommy was thinking of me when she died?" "Yes." "And Jimmy, what do you think happened to her thoughts?" "Huh? Where do thoughts go when people die?" Moments like these always confused Jimmy. He developed a good response, though. "What do you think, Claire? Where do thoughts go?" "I think they float." Jimmy had always been strong when it came to emergencies. If the person had a laceration, he put a bandage on it. If the building was on fire, he took the people out. But things like behavioral therapy and medication management were new. Recently, he'd begun to wonder about all the people who he had saved. Had his role been nothing more than a conveyor belt, removing bodies from harm's way, thinking they could take it from there? "Claire," he said. "Yes, Jimmy. I think your mom's thoughts are spread around you like an invisible cloak." "Like Harry Potter's?" "Yes, sort of, but they help me to see you better." "Huh? Like a highlighter, Claire, or like the light from my fire truck when I need to see someone in a building." Jimmy paused for a moment. "I think your mom's thoughts about you make you brighter and easier to see, to really see." Claire was silent. She pictured herself painted over with a dazzling yellow stripe. "Do you know what I see?" Jimmy continued. "I see a bright and shiny Claire who is made up of a million strong pieces." "Strong like your helmet?" she asked. "Like a million of my helmets melted into one girl. I can't believe I didn't see it before." In Claire's mind, she stood under a bright spotlight surrounded by a fort of helmets. "Can you see yourself?" Jimmy asked. He wrapped his arms around her more tightly and rocked back and forth. "My strong girl." Claire nodded. She looked at the spice rack. Ginger was placed before garlic. She didn't move. Thank you.
Euphemia, and she'll be reading from a completed mystery that takes place in Havana, Cuba. And this excerpt gives some background for her main character, Susan Smith.
A year ago, in July 2006, Susan had stood in the orchestra pit of the San Francisco Opera to play an audition. A black screen hid her from view of the judges. The partition ensured that players would be advanced to the next level auditions for the percussion position with the opera orchestra based not on who they were, but on how well they played. Using 2 felted mallets, Susan beat out the ending to Leos Janáček's Macropolis case on 2 large timpani. The music was not difficult, but the notes needed to boom out with majesty. She concentrated fully, rolling the sticks over the drums with precision until she accidentally caught one stick on the other, which made a tiny, erroneous click. She continued as though nothing had happened, then left, horrified. Did they notice? Of course they did. The rest of the audition had gone so well. The relief, the post-audition tingle, a breathless mesh of excitement and fear, was mixed with a biting and humiliation. This had happened to her before, too many times. She plodded down the darkened side stage, out the door and into another room to join her fellow competitors. She paced the narrow hallway with its scuff-marked white walls until a man with a smooth, gray-tinged face came out and tacked up the list of players who'd made it to the next round. Susan's name wasn't on the wall. Susan slipped out the side door of the opera house, her eyes cast down and her face drawn. She walked slowly toward Mission Street in a weepy summer fog, past speeding cars and blocks of tall, empty government buildings. She held on to the sob that wailed inside her. That would be her last audition. She was too old to continue to try. The dreams she'd worked so hard to achieve during the 30 years of lessons and practices, hours spent alone in tiny, airless rooms, beating away on drums until her arms and hands throbbed, was not going to come true. The reality had been closing in on her for the past few years, as each audition for one of the rare percussion positions yielded nothing. She reached 24th and Mission Streets and stood waiting for the light to turn. In the plaza behind her, a brown-suited evangelist beating the pavement for Jesus yelled in Spanish through a metallic-toned bullhorn. Drug addicts and drunks sat on dried, urine-covered concrete benches, bragging and arguing, their words slurred. The stoplight turned green. Susan heard drumming and looked up and around. The sounds of the instruments floated out an open window from the second floor of a brick building on the corner. The music curled around her, capturing her, and leading her across the street and through an open door off the sidewalk, up a dark stairway, and into a room where 2 men and a woman sat in metal folding chairs, drumming. Dancers, women in long, white ruffled skirts and men in calf-length pants, moved across the floor in 3 lines, their hands at their hips, their shoulders gyrating. The liveliness and complexity of what Susan would later find out were 3 Afro-Cuban bata drums, each played with a different pattern and pitches that varied, melding together yet retaining their distinct timing and sound washed over her like baptismal water. A streak of sun broke through the gray day and wound around the black velvet curtains at the window of the dance studio. Susan leaned against the wall, her eyes wide, as she watched people in the class while they danced or drummed and sang what she'd later find out were songs for the Orishas, gods. The songs added yet another layer of rhythms in what to an untrained ear might have seemed like a melee, but to Susan was an organized polyrhythmic masterpiece. From that day on, Susan immersed herself in bata drumming, learning from anyone she could find who could teach her. She took 3-hour group lessons on Tuesday nights in Berkeley from a path-blazing woman teacher who, 20 years prior, had broken through some of the barriers to women playing the bata. Then hour-long private lessons on Thursday mornings from a jazz percussionist in San Mateo who'd fallen in love with Afro-Cuban music and the Lukumi religion 15 years before. making yearly pilgrimages to Cuba to study the traditional drumming from the masters there. She practiced in the open, in parks, on her own or with others in large studios, learning all she could. The practice felt light and compelling, doubts with an open spirit that playing percussion had never felt for her. Although Susan loved her lessons and studies of guitar, there was still something missing. An important element of authenticity wasn't present in her classes and practice in the United States. She just had to find this piece. She had to go to the source of the music, see the country where it arrived from Africa and changed, developed from its encounter with other cultures, and was slyly defended from those it threatened. Susan needed to take lessons with teachers who'd had the centuries-old music passed down to them directly, who had experienced it as a part of their daily lives. She had to go to Cuba.
Next we have Jennifer, and she's just published Ice Cream Travel Guide. It's a book about her global journey during which she interviewed 60 ice cream shops. Jennifer will read an excerpt from the book called The Beginning in Bangkok, and it explains how the journey began.
Simply put, I love ice cream. In a bowl, in the cone, from a tub, and most of all, on my tongue. But why travel so far from home to find it? It started the first morning in Bangkok in February 2009. Jet lagged and sleep deprived, I sat up at 6 a.m. Outside the haze of the Bangkok skyline appeared the ninth floor hotel window. Exhaustion tore my eyes, demanding sleep that wouldn't come. For the next 2 weeks, I would be traveling with 11 people, classmates, friends of friends, friends, significant others. My boyfriend had backed out of the trip 2 months earlier, worried about unemployment during the recession. I pushed aside my disappointment and started planning. Hotels, airplanes, lady boy shows, kickboxing, ancient ruins, cooking classes. On the flight over, I studied guidebooks and practiced Thai words Sawadi for hello and Khop Kun for thank you. But now, I couldn't sleep, and my mind spun. I tossed and turned in bed, alone, tired, angsty. I don't like beaches. I felt abandoned. What if I didn't like the group activities? Why did I agree to this travel destination, idyllic movie setting for tourists who make bad decisions? Why did I stay home and save money? I needed to get out of this hotel room. I'll be back, I mumbled to a sleeping friend. I'm going to take a walk. Outside, the heat rose, a stark contrast to the chilly mornings of San Francisco. Thai script and red spray paint filled the wall like the blood splatters. Through windows, I heard pots and pans clattering as the day's cooking commenced. Young students in uniform gossiped as if I wasn't present. Above, construction workers stomped through 24 building skeletons. The banner in English declared, "We build what you dream." Stopping on an overpass, I stare at the strange cityscape. Familiar golden arches poking through concrete buildings, shacks, and power lines. I pass a colorful open-air market, bustling with morning activity. Small scales lay ready for weighing. Garlands of jasmine flowers grace the rows of stands, punctuating the air with their scent. Housewives bartered, locals gawked with broken teeth. I dragged my feet, wondering what I had gotten myself into. All I saw were endless rows of things I didn't want to eat, unfamiliar faces, and a foreign land. Then, suddenly, there it was. A metal cart rolled down the road, rang seductive bells. It glistened in the sun, and I recognized a symbol, a circle, and a triangle. Ice cream. My eyes widened, and I just had to have it. Just the previous week, I had rushed downtown to the travel clinic. A woman with thick 80s-style glasses sat me down and dispensed advice. Only eat food if it's cooked in front of you, and make sure it's hot. she said. Okay, I said, agreeing to her common sense. Do not eat cold foods, she said, and wagged her finger. You don't want traveler's diarrhea. So, walking toward the metal box in Bangkok, I hesitated, remembering the warnings. But then, the ice cream man smiled. I smiled back and gestured wildly to the picture of the ice cream. One, I said as I held up a finger. As I dug out cash, he placed 3 scoops on a small cone and handed it back to me. I nodded and took a lick while grasping for the only Thai word I knew at that moment. Arroy is delicious. The man chuckled and returned his wrinkled hands to ringing the bells in his cart. Years later, I don't remember the flavors he gave me. Corn, mango, dragon fruit, guava. What I do remember was the feeling of nostalgia at that moment. Being 6 years old and stealing a lick from my sister's cone, a preteen receiving a bowl of vanilla ice cream after one of my parents' greasy homemade meals, a college student swallowing ice cream to wash away heartbreaks. As I finished the cone, my heart felt optimistic. My steps were lighter, and I smiled at the locals. I purchased a jasmine garland. I paid a woman to trim my hair. I tasted the broth of a spicy noodle soup at a stall. I admired the graffiti that turned rusty nails and peeling paint into smiles. I sampled coconut pancakes. Even better, this ice cream lover avoided food poisoning. So, this is what I discovered through my journey. The best ice cream is not the ice cream found at far-flung destinations. It's the ice cream that you can share with others. It may be the ice cream at the local ice cream shop, the fancy one, or a not so fancy one. It may be the ice cream pint or the gallon that you purchase at the grocery store. I believed that the world had an answer for me. As I visited ice cream shop after ice cream shop, I found out that it wasn't there. Like the saying goes, it was at home all along. Ice cream is community. Well, I discovered that ice cream around the world is about the people. Ice cream is happiness. Or as my sister pointed out, you can't buy happiness, but you can buy ice cream. So let's get a scoop.
Next we have Marin. She's a San Francisco-based writer and designer, and her near future fiction explores the effects of technology on individuals and society. And she's going to be reading from an excerpt from her novella called The Perfect Specimen.
Thank you. That's good. Before I start, I'll give you some context, because this takes place in the middle of my novella. It's 100 years in the future on newly colonized planet Victoria. Dr. Derek Singh is a research scientist studying the effect of insect venom on tumors, and Anton is his lazy lab assistant. At the end of another very long night, I wearily removed my glasses, then nearly jumped when I saw Anton leaning against a specimen wall, watching me, a stim cigarette in his mouth. How long had he been there? He never stayed late, not even when I asked him to. You done? He asked. Yes, I glanced at the wall. It was nearly 2 a.m. He jerked a thumb to the door. Let's get a drink. We never spent time together outside work. Not tonight, I protested. Thanks for the offer, but I'm too tired. I can barely see. This was true. I'd been in hypercolor 3D space for hours and had a hard time focusing on the desaturated world around me. I insist, boss. Whatever this was about, it wasn't good. Nonetheless, I was stuck for him for the next year. I couldn't very well reject his first social invitation. We took a pod to a garish residential high-rise in Ring 1. The gold-painted facade was brightly lit and covered in faux hieroglyphics. Anton led me away from the main entrance to a small walkway that ran down the side of the building, then stopped abruptly and turned toward the wall. A laser bloomed from the center of a starkly carved lily, found his face and flicked up and down like the fast-beating wings of a hummingbird. Moments later, the solidity in front of us dissolved to reveal an elevator, one with no buttons, I noted. We flew upwards. Anton smirked when I reached the side of the wall to steady myself. The doors opened onto a scene of overblown opulence. Everything in the huge room was white. Walls, ceiling, chairs, tables, the uniforms of the waiters. Low-hanging crystal chandeliers cast a deep blue vibrating light that stressed my tired eyes. Based on the well-dressed crowd and the drinks and drugs being served, this was one of the exclusive private clubs I'd heard about. Anton greeted the doorman with a handshake and a slap on the shoulder. A discussion ensued. I gathered, from the way the doorman flapped his hands at me like he was shooing a fly, that I wasn't properly dressed. My work uniform had never looked so shabby. My t-shirt, normally covered by a lab coat, evidenced strange Rorschach-like splotches in the ultraviolet light. Anton palmed a screen the doorman held, and moments later a thin young man offered me a long silver coat. I took it, amused that clothing so garish served as camouflage here. Indeed, my sole function now was to reflect the glory around me. As Anton sauntered toward a booth in the back, I realized I'd never seen him in his element. At the lab, IQ points trumped wealth, and his arrogance was subdued. Here, heads turned as he passed. Willowy women with hair like sparkling waterfalls bent towards him for kisses, and men in suits worth more than my grant gave him rough hugs. Once we were seated, he evaluated me and appeared satisfied with my tourist awe of my surroundings. "You've been here before?" he asked unnecessarily. He flagged down a waiter and ordered a bottle of CZ, an expensive earth vodka. This was getting stranger and stranger. I tried to imagine what prompted the invitation, had no answer, other than Anton meant for me to feel stupid and out of place as payback for how he felt at work. The vodka arrived with a bucket of ice and 2 small glasses. Anton poured, handed me a drink, then held his up for a toast. I clinked uncertainly. He smiled broadly. "To you, for getting me out of the shithole of a job my mother forced on me." He pressed a button on the table and a translucent white dome formed over us. I viewed the rest of the club as through a steamy glass shower door. Faint hissing replaced the atonal music and the buzz of the crowd. Anton snapped his fingers to get my attention, then with all the theatricality of a magician, pulled back the sleeve of his long shirt. As obvious as stars in the midnight sky, I saw the same symmetrical rash I'd had on my own arms countless times. He flipped his hand to face me as if for a high five. I didn't move. He shrugged and knocked back the rest of the vodka in one gulp. "I totally misjudged you. I should have known. The quiet ones, doing research that no one understands. Perfect. Lots of time to sneak in other projects." A group of 3 women wandered by our table, their nearly transparent dresses hiding little of their sculpted bodies, but Anton kept his eyes on me. "This is great shit. It's smooth and undetectable." I walked straight through the scanners at HQ without even a chirp. You know how many of my friends have been trying to find ways to get high at work? You're a genius, man. I'm going to sell this unofficially for a few years and then take the formula to R&D and make a fortune on the patent. My patent. I was too stunned to speak. He had no problem filling the silence. I didn't put 2 and 2 together until that kid came in a few weeks ago. It was obvious you were hungover nearly every day, and I saw your weird rash a few times, but I figured you were allergic to some plant out in the undeveloped lots. Then she came in, all spacey, with the same rash. He shook his head in mock approbation. "I never thought you'd be the type to test a drug on a little girl. I'm..." His fake frown reversed. "Really fucking impressed, man. That was brilliant. She wouldn't know what was going on. You could test the dosage and effects on a different body weight. Sure, that would be illegal on Earth, with all those laws and human rights, but we don't have to worry about any of that on Victoria. Good call doing your research and development here." He refilled his glass and held it up for a toast again. When I didn't respond, he laughed and drank alone. Thank you.
Next we have Susan, and she writes about relationships, women in tech, and cocktails. She'll read an excerpt from her novel in progress, Invisible Ink. It's also set in a near future San Francisco where the Golden Gate Bridge no longer exists.
Story of my life. You know how it is for parents of a toddler. It's easy for two to get lost in the tumult of three. So Jesse and I try to go out at least once a month, just me and him. Sometimes we do the whole dinner thing, but often enough it's cocktails and appetizers at the bar. A new venue in an up-and-coming neighborhood, something that lets us feel like we're still part of the energy of the city. Tonight, it's Meccano, Palo field cuisine, Hunter's Point. Jesse reaches across the table and pushes a strand of hair out of my face. His fingers linger on my cheek, and I look up at him coyly from underneath my bangs. I'm the redhead tonight, and the redhead is flirty. I lean forward and find his knee under the table. He blushes. That's how it goes with the redhead. It started with the paparazzi. That's not true. It started with my eyebrows. The grief counselor said that anxiety can manifest itself in strange ways, especially with people who are protective of their loved ones. Everyone said how well I was handling the chaos that followed when the Golden Gate Bridge came down. But inside my head swirled the things I should, could, must have done. My brows are strong, dark, arched. They help define my face. Normally I tweeze them once a week or so as regular maintenance between visits to the salon. But one day it went further than that. A series of tiny stabs, delicate, poignant, pricking me ever so slightly in a place I rarely felt pain. It focused me. I entered some kind of trance, and when I snapped out of it, my left brow was just a scarecrow, the right one patchy and weird. I tried to repair the damage, but I didn't have much time. I was already late to pick up my daughter from Betsy's place. I jammed a baseball cap on my head and got in the car. But when Betsy saw my clumsy attempt to pencil my brows back in, she ushered me into her bedroom. I have backup, she said, pointing to her shaved head. Then she opened her closet door. A row of empty faces looked back at me. She grabbed one of their wigs and held it up next to my face. Dark chocolate brown like my hair, but with bangs that would obscure the tragedy that was my brow line. We spent some time restyling it with my wig. As I prepared to leave, Betsy plucked a blonde wig off its pedestal. Take this one too. Sometimes you need to look like someone else. Back then I did. After the bridge came down, I'd been relentlessly hassled, and not just by the paparazzi. I'd arrive somewhere and the barrage would begin. Selfie fans jostling to get next to me, people grilling me about my family, referring to my daughter as though they knew her. Is Taima walking yet? Harmless enough, but I needed it to stop. Luckily, my features are not that distinctive. Even Jesse did a double take when the blonde with a bob sidled into the living room that night. It gave me a rush. Jesse too, because even with the tweezers at bay, we've amassed quite a harem. Our evenings out often feature another girl. It occurs to me tonight that I've been one-upped by my stepsister, her whole face permanently restyled. But the redhead pushes that thought away. She can do that. She's not one to dwell or ponder, and when she enters a room, she doesn't search the space for intruding eyes. She just strides in and lets them look. Not that the redhead is the center of attention here. The crowd at Meccano is Rubba Youngin styled up. A minxie girl with long black hair squeezes by our table. Her eye makeup is startling, orange and red stripes. She checks Jesse out, I swear. Then she joins a group of guys playing shot clock at the bar. Is one of them wearing a Tom Ford cape? It's weird when your social life gets dialed down by work and kid. Suddenly you're blindsided by what's not even new. Jesse and I embark on one of our favorite debates, chef selection versus a la carte. We're perusing the menu slate, our heads close, when a headline runs across the top. Bridge still up in the air as bomber trial looms. The redhead flicks it away. No more discussion. She wants the chef selection. She leans her chin on her hand, aims a languid smile at Jesse. Is everything okay at work, he asks. Bam! The redhead struts away and slams the door behind her. How does she move so fast in those heels? And so I begin. My job is to produce a design for the new bridge. The trial is just bringing attention to the fact that we still don't have one. My team is not making things easier. I have 3 designers who report to me. The first one wants my job, the second one argues with the first one, and the third one wants my attention all the time. It's like having extra children. Jesse is a good listener. He's been trained. He makes the appropriate noises. He stays focused on my litany, even when the waiter muscles in with our silver beet flatbread. Jesse pushes the plate towards me. I thought you had a new design pretty much wrapped up. Not an approved design, but we do have a solid proposal, I explain. Do we? I break off a piece of flatbread. It's good, really good. And I discover once again that no amount of anxiety will diminish my appetite. Food is more than comfort to me and Jesse. It's practically our religion.
Peter is next. He's the author of 3 novels, Games of Chance, Levantine, and Time on My Hands. He lives in Potrero Hill with his wife Bonnie and their lab dachshund mix Doxy, who it says here was kicked out of hearing dog school for cheating on the final exam. He'll be reading an abridged version of his story, Gypsies.
An old friend of mine was in Rome, enjoying the Piazza del Popolo, when he became aware of an apparently crazy woman nearby. She was bumping into pedestrians, chattering in some unknown tongue, all the while holding an infant in front of her. My friend's instinct was to get out of there, but all of a sudden she was upon him, as if by teleportation. Wild-eyed and grimy, she spent the next several minutes pressing the baby against him, yammering senselessly, never taking her eyes off his. He protested illogically, "I don't want your baby," and repeatedly checked his right pants pocket wherein lay his wallet. Eventually, 2 carabinieri approached, spoke harshly to the woman, and in broken English, asked my friend if everything was all right. He produced his wallet and his passport. One of the cops pointed to the woman and said, "Gypsy, big troubles." Hours later, when it came time to pay for his dinner, my friend discovered that the 400 euros in his wallet were in fact not in his wallet, where they'd certainly been that morning. Was this the gypsy woman's work? How? He worked it out. While she was squeezing the baby against his torso, both her hands had been free. She'd lifted the wallet from his pocket, slipped out the cash, and returned the wallet in a flash. Most likely, as a matter of expediency, she'd left him his credit card. I was stopped at a red light on 16th Street in San Francisco, waiting to cross Potrero Avenue, when a small pickup truck pulled up to my left. The man in the passenger seat called to me, "I can fix that hole in your bumper for $100. I'd had a good experience with pop-up auto body guys before, so I figured, what the hell? And they followed me home. The guys were both in their mid-30s, both about 5'10", both on the swarthy side, both with receding hairlines. They weren't quite twins, but they could easily have been brothers. They introduced themselves as Bob and Mike. Each spoke with the slightest of accents, suggesting either that they'd come to the United States as boys, or they'd grown up here in homes where a foreign language was primary. While Bob inspected the bumper, Mike made a tour of the rest of the car. In the front, he said, "We could do this too," and he pointed to a gouge in the hood encircling the chrome Toyota logo. "How about 200? 200 for everything? No, my friend, 100 for the bumper, like we said, and 200 for the hood." I hesitated. "We do good work," Mike said. "We got a lot of satisfied customers. Bob, he works at the Acme Body Shop down by the Cow Palace. You know it?" "I can't say I do." "Well, you can call him. Ask him about Bob. You want the number?" "That's all right," I said. "Why don't you just go ahead and do the bumper?" Bob joined the conversation. "Look, I don't want to tell you how to run your life, but that hood gonna rust. You need to get that fixed, painted." "How about 200 for everything?" I said. Mike and Bob proceeded to have a brief exchange in a language unfamiliar to me, after which Mike said, "250 for everything." "It's a deal," I said. Another quick chat in the alien language. It wasn't quite Slavic, not guttural enough to be Arabic or Persian. Mike said, "Okay, we're going to get the paint." "You want the paint coat? I've got it in the glove compartment." Mike shook his head dismissively. "It's okay, we know what we're doing. We're going to match that paint perfect, you'll see." I said, "What's that language you're speaking?" "Romanian," Mike replied. Romanian I know. It's a Romance language island surrounded by a sea of Slavs and Hungarians, so it brings to mind a Russian speaking bad French. I said, Romanian or Romany? Mike grinned from ear to ear and said something to Bob, then to me in English. So, you're a smart guy. You know about Romany. He extended his arms, palms upward, and made a sort of smiley grimace. So, yeah, we're gypsies. A lot of people don't like that, you know. A lot of people think gypsies are all out to cheat you, steal from you. But we're honest guys. Bob said, we do good work. Down the hill went the little pickup, and back it roared after no more than 10 minutes. Bob emerged from the truck holding an aerosol can. Spray paint, I said? Perfect match, Mike replied. We know what we're doing, you'll see. At least they had real tools. Bob removed the bumper cover and worked to reattach what resembled a huge hangnail. Mike opened the hood and whacked away at the indentation with a rubber mallet. I said, don't you have to heat the metal to work it back into shape? No, this is such an even dent. It'll pound right out. You'll see. It's going to look like new. Give us 40, 50 minutes. You know what you have to pay at the body shop? You want us to stop now? We take it to the shop, get an estimate. Don't have to, because I'll tell you, this hood, they're going to charge you $1,000. That bumper, $300 minimum. You see, my friend? This way you get a professional job for $250. Everybody's happy. 40 minutes later, I examined their handiwork. If this were auto body school, I'd have to give Bob a C+, maybe a B- for the bumper. Mike, though, would flunk out. Where there had been a gouge, there remained a large dent, dull and rippled. The paint difference on the hood was clear and ugly. Grinning, Mike said, well, what do you think? Bumper's not bad, but the hood's terrible. Terrible? How do you mean? Mike seemed genuinely taken aback. Hey, Bob interrupted. For $250, you're not going to get perfect. This is a good job. Mike said it would be a perfect match. It's nowhere near a perfect match. They chatted briefly in Romany, and then Mike turned to me. You wait 24 hours for the paint to cure, then you buff it. You will know the difference. You want me to come back and buff it? No problem. Okay, I'll give you 200 now and 50 when you come back and buff it. More Romany. Shrugs. Okay, said Mike. You're the boss. Money exchanged. Bob said, we do good work. Mike said, listen, can we use your men's room? While Bob used the bathroom, Mike and I stood by a chest of drawers 10 feet away. Mike said, nice place. Thanks, I replied, and then making conversation, are you guys brothers? They were not brothers, Mike said, but kind of cousins. What did that mean? He didn't elaborate. The toilet flushed. Bob appeared and laughed when Mike said I'd asked if they were brothers. I felt more and more in the dark. Mike decided he didn't need to use the bathroom after all. Well, I said, see you tomorrow for the buffing. Nice meeting you, Mike said, and the kind of cousin sidled to the door. I hadn't really expected Mike to return for the buffing, and he didn't. Ever hopeful, I buffed the hood myself, after which it looked just as rough and off color as before. Months later, our goddaughter called and asked if we could videotape an important family function. I'd last used the sleek little JVC mini DV camera to interview my father a few weeks before his death, and left it and the tape in a chest next to the dining room table. It wasn't there, nor was it any other logical place. My wife had no memory of moving it. The camera was a compact silvery thing just about pocket size. The chest was right where Mike and I had been standing. I thought of my friend's adventure in Rome. I imagined Mike and Bob sitting outside the Acme body shop watching my late father reminisce about his youth. Gypsies. Much time passed. The owner of the body shop down the hill asked me if I'd done the hood repair myself. And then he made it look like new. We had a visit from our friend Joe, who is fond of scotch. Did we have any? Perhaps deep within a little-used living room cabinet. I reached in, feeling for bottles, found instead a compact silvery JVC camera. Mike and Bob and gypsies of the world, I extend my heartfelt apologies.
Next is Chad. His newest novel is called Secrets, and it's available now through Torquay Press. He is the founding member of the Alabama Street Writers Group, and he's currently working on a short story collection tentatively entitled Horror Days. He'll read a story called Behind the Walls.
Late in the day, just before nightfall, Henry Cousins drove the converted school bus. He'd been watching the gas gauge dip below empty for the last 10 miles. He was in his mid-30s, deeply tanned with a strong back and arms from manual labor. As he crested over a ridge, a small sign popped up that read Litcrawl Township. Funny, he'd never heard of that township before. Just then the engine sputtered, stalled, and died on the shoulder of the road. He slumped over the steering wheel and sighed. Jane, his wife, called to him from the back of the bus. "Is everything all right?" She pushed a wisp of hair from her face and wiped her hand on her tattered dress. "It's just that we're out of gas," Henry replied. "That's all." Henry looked through the windshield at the imposing walled township. Walls that were made of thick boards he guessed were 20 feet in height. A space had been cleared from the nearby forest. There was a gap between the trees and the walls, surrounded by beds of crops. He hadn't seen a fresh tomato since before the dieback. He heard a voice behind him. "Out of gas again, Henry?" It was his friend Leland. They were the same age, and their bond was deepened by their struggle to survive on the road. "Yeah, I'm walking into town. Keep an eye on the bus." "Sure, no problem," Leland said. Henry said goodbye to his wife and son and walked towards the imposing walls of Litcrawl Township. He felt loose pebbles through his well-worn boots as he walked along the crumbling blacktop road. A sentry post was positioned next to the main gate. An armed guard stood above him with a rifle pointed towards his head. The man called down to him, "State your business." "Ran out of gas a ways down the road. I was wondering, do you have any to spare? I could put in some work." "Are there more of you?" "Yes." "How many?" "4 families, men, women, and children." "Where were you before this?" "Alberta Township, until the food began to run out." He noticed tracks that ran behind the walls along the back wall and disappeared into the distance. He was pretty sure he could see fields of corn as well. "The rest of you are women and children?" the guard asked. "Yes." "You'd have to interview with the mayor." "Of course, you don't know us, but trust me, we're 4 families, not nomads." Henry tried to stop his racing thoughts, imagining what was on the other side of the walls. No openings or windows anywhere. He examined the wall's construction, how thick and impenetrable they appeared. What are they keeping in, or keeping out? He considered gleaning corn from the fields and going back to the bus. Just then the gate creaked open, slightly. "Thank you," Henry said, stepping inside. But there was a second barrier, and all he could see was another wall and more guards. In the first light of morning, Henry woke up to a knock on the door. The bus had been parked inside the inner and outer fence overnight. He was curious, but he hadn't seen the township yet. He was greeted by a man wearing a cowboy hat. "Ed Thurston," the man shook hands firmly. "Everybody calls me Sheriff." "Henry Cousins, nice to meet you." "Follow me. The mayor's house is clear across on the other side of the compound." Inside the walls, they walked across the township. A hard-packed path cut straight through the middle of the town. He looked at small houses and apartment buildings on either side. No street signs anywhere. They passed a warehouse with an open garage door. He wondered how all of this had been built during the reconstruction after the dieback. He counted 5 vehicles parked in front of the garage. "Haven't seen this many in one place since the collapse," Henry said. "Yup," said the sheriff. Henry watched the mechanics dressed in clean overalls. They worked silently and in perfect unison, like the inner workings of a clock. The shelves were bare and tools were immaculately organized, hung on pegboard. "I'm surprised you're able to find gas." "Not gas, it's corn alcohol. We have a distillery also used in our generators." Electricity, something he remembered from a distant past. "Do you have running water and indoor plumbing?" Henry asked. "Sure, plenty of fresh water from the aqueduct. We're self-sufficient folk. We hardly ever go scavenging. You know how dangerous it can be on the road." "I know. I've had to do terrible things," Henry said. He shook his head vigorously to chase horrific images from his brain, following the sheriff into a yellow brick building. The back edge of the wall skirted right up alongside the solid imposing building. An armed guard sat in a chair just outside the front door. "Morning." The sheriff tipped his hat as they entered. "Morning, Sheriff." The sheriff pushed the door open and Henry followed. "Mayor Littigot's this way." He stepped inside and climbed a flight of steps. Down a dark hallway, he saw a man seated in a leather chair. As he stood up, Henry noticed he was slim, with dark eyes and a hawkish nose. "Welcome." He shook Henry's hand limply. "Willis Littigot, pleasure to meet you, sir." "Likewise." Henry let go of the clammy handshake and wiped his hand on his pants. "Thanks for feeding us last night." "Naturally. You could call me Mayor. Everyone here does." "Yes, sir." "Where have you been so far?" "Alberta and Dearborn. Food ran out, then we fended for ourselves." "On the road?" "That's right." Henry wondered why he'd never heard of the mayor or Littigot Township. "Well, we're thriving. Plenty of crops, water, and livestock to go around. But the work's hard. No way around that." "That's not surprising. You've created a fantastic community." The mayor beamed broadly. "What did you do before the die-off? Work-wise?" "I was in the military." "A military man, you say? You might just be useful around here." Thank you.
And now we have Sonia, and she writes about the awkward encounters, bizarre luck, and incredible characters she meets while bumbling around the world. She'll be reading Finding Zen in a Love Hotel.
When I told the driver, Hotel Chapel Cinderella, he raised an eyebrow inquisitively, the most expressive gesture I'd seen from a well-mannered, white-gloved Kyoto taxi driver. He nodded at the booking confirmation without reading the address, glancing at me a couple of times in the rearview mirror during the short drive to the hotel. This was my third and final attempt at accommodations for the night. I had planned to spend the night at a Zen monastery in Mount Koya, listening to monks chant, taking a peaceful walk through the sacred cemetery at Akuno-in, soaking in the onsen, sleeping on a thin futon in a spare room where I could contemplate emptiness. What I hadn't counted on was all the Japanese tourists who also wanted to spend their weekend visiting the temples of Koyasa and Kyoto. All the monasteries were booked, along with most of Kyoto's hotels. So I booked a last-minute apartment on Agoda and arranged to meet a friend for dinner. After much confusion and learning that sometimes the address is the name of an entire area, not a street, I contacted the host only to learn the apartment was listed by mistake and unavailable. Since I was standing on a sidewalk with my luggage, late for dinner plans, and there were no better places left in this part of Kyoto, I hastily booked Hotel Chapel Cinderella. It had a review score of 6 out of 10, but was not far, and the room looked pretty good in the photos. It was clear the driver knew where he was going as he drove past the blue hotel sign, around to the back, where the entrance was tucked away. The path was marked by a line of lit-up plastic footmen leading to a door with a bust of Cinderella etched on the frosted glass pane. True Blue by Madonna was playing as I entered and found the discreet check-in window partly concealed by a curtain so I could see only the mouth and chin of the receptionist. "Only one person?" he asked. I looked around while he ensured the room was ready. Beneath a blown glass chandelier with blue accents and pink flowers stood a table arrayed with dishes of brightly colored powder, which turned out to be scented bath salts. Glass wall cases displayed champagne and bouquets of roses. The room was the largest I'd seen in Japan, with crown molding, a Baroque mirror behind the big bed, and an elaborate crystal chandelier. Not bad, except for the stale smoke mixed with some other smell I couldn't place. When I complained that I had booked a non-smoking room, the flustered clerk told me they always run an air filter between guests, which I took to mean there were really no non-smoking rooms. A few surprising objects caught my eye as I rushed to get ready for dinner. A black massage chair, a hot pink slot machine featuring a pink-haired anime character, a karaoke set, and a big jacuzzi tub. It was a treat to dine with a friend who could speak fluent Japanese and identify the various sea creatures on the grill. I explained my delay and described my cheesy hotel. "Sounds like a love hotel," he said, between bites of grilled octopus. "This country is set up to encourage trysts. Do they have rates by the hour?" "No, I booked it on Agoda, just a standard overnight hotel booking, no hourly rates." After dinner, he called a taxi to take me back to Hotel Chapel Cinderella. "No one's ever going to understand you if you say Hotel Chapel Cinderella," he said. Further exploration of the room confirmed that my friend was right. The brochure by the bed showed room rates for rests as short as 90 minutes. Food and an assortment of interesting toys could be delivered to the room. In lieu of a minibar, there was a vending machine containing some intriguing gold packages and a few I could make out, including a G-string, Titan condoms, and executive lotion. Well, well, grasshopper. What to do when you end up alone in a love hotel? The hell with it. I fired up the massage chair and ran a bath, pouring in some fuchsia-colored berry-scented bath powder. A button in the jacuzzi switched off the bathroom lights and turned on a red light inside the tub. To complete the ambiance, I turned on the small TV embedded in the wall above the tub and picked a Japanese show that seemed no worse than the others. I gave up on getting the karaoke or slot machine to work since I couldn't read the instructions. A love chapel instead of a Zen monastery, a lurid jacuzzi instead of a healing onsen, a massage chair instead of meditation, stale cigarette smoke instead of monks burning prayer sticks over an ancient altar. As I crawled into bed, contemplating whether these differences were just mental constructs, all illusion, I realized it wasn't just stale smoke the room smelled of, it was stale sex. I remembered hearing about an expose showing how much semen was on a typical hotel room duvet. I tried to convince myself it was probably cleaner in Japan, and finally fell into a fitful sleep. When I checked out Sunday morning, there were two tittering couples in the lobby, holding hands, giggling and whispering, dressed up like prom night, but I guess they were in their mid-20s. I'd seen news stories commenting on a recent government survey showing that nearly 40% of Japanese singles in their 20s and 30s didn't want a romantic partner, and 20% of young men in their 20s were completely uninterested in sex in what should be their horniest years. Well, at least a few were getting it on here. With worries about low birth rates, maybe the Japanese government gave some kind of subsidy for love hotels. I suppose I wasn't their target, being alone and not Japanese. "You could have called a taxi from your room," the clerk chided, uncomfortable with his patrons lurking in plain sight. He directed me to wait in booth number 3. I entered the confessional-sized vestibule, which had a phone on a small table and a thin panel dividing it from booth 2. Eventually the phone rang, although I could hear the clerk's voice from his office steps away as well as on the phone, telling me my taxi had arrived. My visit to the chapel was complete.
Thank you for coming, everyone, and a special thanks to the City Art Cooperative Gallery for hosting this event. If you'd like, please join us for the reception in the back. There's some wine and snacks, and you get to meet all the writers. And remember that their books, some of the books are on sale in the front there. Thanks.
Thank you everyone for coming and braving the rain. We really appreciate it. And I'd like to give a huge thank you to the members of the Alabama Street Writers Group. You can find us on our WordPress webpage, which is alabamastreetwritersgroup.wordpress.com, I think.
Yes.
.org.
Yes.
.com.
You can find us on Facebook even.
You can find us on Facebook, and also a huge thanks to City Art and Ann Kolonovich for also helping do some coordination, everybody pitching in. Thank you so much. So we've been really fortunate to host this event for the past 3 years, and finally we want to really thank Litcrawl. It's a fantastic organization. So, do what you can to support the arts, support writers, support the local community, and thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, and have a great night. Take care.